The first time the dust reached her tongue, it tasted like copper. Ainsley Monroe stepped off the stagecoach and into the kind of heat that bent the air. Behind her, the road shimmered and trembled, a thin vein stretching back toward the city she'd left, toward the life she'd shed. In front of her, the land sprawled out like an unfinished painting. Brush strokes of golden grass, splintered fences, a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow her whole. She adjusted her hat, a city thing too clean for this place, and scanned the crowd at the depot. Ranch hands leaned against posts, boots caked in red earth, eyes quick and measuring. The smell of horse sweat and tobacco tangled in the wind. Somewhere, a hammer struck metal in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He stood apart, blue eyes, the impossible kind that caught the light and held it, shoulders like they'd been carved to bear weight. His shirt was patched at the elbows, dust-streaked from the day's work, but he carried himself with a straightness that made the poverty look almost noble. His hands were the color of sun-baked earth, and when he lifted a sack of feed onto a wagon, the muscles in his arms coiled like ropes. She didn't know why she kept watching. The boy, no, man, glanced her way once, quick as a breath, and looked back to his work. But there was something in that look. Not curiosity, exactly, not interest. Something quieter. The rancher's voice cut across the yard. "Eli, you haulin' that grain sometime this year." Eli. The name settled in her like a pebble dropped in water. Ainsley turned away, though her eyes flickered back when she caught the shift in his posture. He moved faster now, no complaint, no slack. The sun clung to him as he worked, and she saw, with sudden certainty, that he was the kind of man who'd been carrying other people's burdens his whole life. By evening, the depot emptied. The stagecoach rattled off in a cloud of grit, and the town sank into the long shadows of the dying day. She found the boarding house. 2 stories of warped clapboard, its porch sagging under the weight of years, and rented a room. The land had a way of speaking in silence. From her window, she could see the fields stretch out, their edges swallowed by dusk. A wind moved through the grass like the slow exhale of something sleeping but restless. She could feel it already. This place didn't give without taking. The next morning, she saw him again. Eli was repairing a fence along the main road, his shirt clinging damp to his back, a hammer tucked into his belt. She slowed as she passed. "You always work this hard before breakfast?" she asked. His eyes lifted, startled. Up close, they weren't just blue. They were the exact shade of the summer sky before a storm. "Fence don't fix itself," he said, voice low, the edges worn like leather. "That's so," she replied, fighting a smile. "And here I thought the West was all card games and saloons." One corner of his mouth twitched. "You must be from somewhere else." "Guilty," she said. He looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. Figures. She might have walked on then, but something kept her rooted. "Who do you work for?" "Mr. Coulter," he said. "Owns the land far as you can see." "And you?" "I own my hands. That's all." The way he said it, without self-pity, without bitterness, made her chest tighten. She nodded and moved on, but the sound of his hammer followed her, steady as a heartbeat. Days passed. The town moved slow but not lazily. It had the pace of people who knew the work would never end, so there was no use rushing. She saw Eli in passing, hauling sacks to the mill, shoveling feed, breaking a stubborn horse in the yard. Always working, always silent. Then came the night she found him by the river. She'd gone walking, restless under a full moon that made the grass glow silver. The air smelled of damp earth and mesquite. She heard the water before she saw it. And then she saw him, crouched at the edge, washing the day's dirt from his hands. His shirt hung on a branch nearby, and the moonlight traced every hard line of muscle and scar. "You following me?" he asked without looking up. "Maybe," she said. He chuckled, a sound that surprised them both. "You got the wrong idea about me, city girl." "And what idea is that?" "That I'm worth following." The words landed like a stone. She stepped closer, the grass whispering under her boots. "What if I decide that for myself?" Eli straightened, the water dripping from his fingers. His eyes caught the moonlight, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was a quiet in him, but not the peaceful kind. It was a quiet of someone holding something back, something dangerous if loosed. "You don't belong here," he said at last. "Maybe I do," she replied. They stood like that, the river talking between them, until the night deepened and the chill set in. She left before he did, but she knew. Sooner or later, she'd find herself standing beside him again. A week later, she learned the first truth about him. She was in the mercantile when two men came in, loud with drink. One slapped coins on the counter. The other slouched against a barrel of flour. Coulter still got that blue-eyed ox working his land, the slouched one asked. "Reckon so," the other said. "Heard tell he don't talk much, 'cause he's afraid folks will remember what he did." Ainsley stilled. "Hell," the first man laughed. "Ain't no one forgetting murder." The shopkeep's glance flickered her way, quick as a warning. The men laughed again, bought their tobacco, and stumbled out. She didn't ask. Not yet. That night, from her window, she saw Eli walking the fence line alone. The moon laid silver over the fields, and his shadow stretched long and thin behind him. He moved like a man who expected trouble and maybe deserved it. The land around him felt different after that, less like a wide-open canvas, more like a loaded gun waiting for a hand. It came sooner than she expected. 3 days later, a herd broke through the east fence, trampling Coulter's bean crop. She heard the shouts before she saw them, Coulter red-faced and roaring, Eli running to cut the cattle off. Men from town gathered, quick to watch but slow to help. When the last of the herd was penned, Coulter rounded on Eli. "You useless bastard," he spat. "Can't trust you with a damn thing." Eli didn't flinch. Fence was weak. "I told you last week it needed mending." "You told me?" Coulter stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You don't tell me nothing, boy. You take orders." The air between them thickened. Ainsley found herself moving before she thought, stepping between them. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharper than she felt. Coulter's gaze slid to her. "And who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows shouting doesn't fix fences," she replied. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Coulter snorted, spat in the dirt, and walked off. Eli watched her, expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have done that." "Maybe I wanted to. That kind of one gets people hurt," he said. Then he walked away, leaving her in the dust. She stood there, heart thudding, the sky burning itself out over the horizon. Somewhere in that fading light, something had shifted, not just between them, but in the land itself. It felt like the beginning of a storm. The morning she found him on the edge of the field. The frost still clung to the grass like a thin coat of glass. Eli stood with his hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the bare stretch of land as if it had wronged him. The fence was fixed now, every post straight, every wire taut, but the space beyond it lay quiet, stripped of motion. "You thinking of leaving?" Ainsley asked, her breath clouding in the cold. He didn't turn. "Thinking don't change much." She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Then maybe you're thinking wrong." His gaze slid to hers, the blue of his eyes sharp against the gray morning. "You don't know what this place does to people." "I'm starting to." She pulled a small canvas bag from under her coat and set it in his hands. "Seeds. For hens." He frowned. "Seeds for hens?" "They eat them, then we eat the eggs." A long pause, and then, "You're serious." "I am." The wind caught a strand of her hair, whipping it across her cheek. Eli looked back at the land, then at the bag in his hands. "You think a couple of chickens can fix my life?" "I think doing nothing won't," she said. That was how it began. 2 hens bought from a farmer with a bad leg and a better sense of humor. They kept them in a pen behind the boarding house, and Ainsley tended them at dawn while Eli still worked Coulter's land. The hens were noisy, stubborn creatures, but the first morning an egg appeared, smooth and warm in her palm. She felt something shift in her chest. The shift reached Eli, too, though he didn't say it. He just came by after work more often, leaning on the pen fence, watching the hens with a quiet she couldn't quite read. By spring, the pen grew crowded. She bought more, traded bread, and preserved for extra feed. Eli started building a coop from scrap wood, his hand steady even when the wind cut through the yard. They sold their first dozen eggs to the baker for a few coins. and when she handed Eli his half, he stared at it like it wasn't real. "You keep it," he said. "We earned it," she replied. He pocketed the coins. "Feels strange." Good strange. His silence was answer enough. The hens came first. Then the goats. They bought 3 from a widow downriver who was selling off her herd. Eli loaded them into a borrowed wagon, the animals bleating all the way back. The goats were work. More work than either of them had guessed. But they gave milk, and milk became cheese, and cheese sold fast in a town where people were tired of salt pork. Their days settled into a rhythm. Mornings in the pens, afternoons in the fields, nights counting coins on the kitchen table. The money grew in a small tin box they kept under a loose floorboard in Ainsley's room. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Sometimes she caught him looking at her in the half-light, as though he were trying to understand what she'd done to his life. One evening, rain swept in from the west, rattling the windows and soaking the yard in minutes. They were inside, mending a broken latch, when Eli said, "We could buy land." Ainsley set down the hammer. "Our own." He nodded. "There's a piece north of the river. Small, good pasture." She felt the warmth of it rise in her chest, that quiet, dangerous thing called hope. "Then we'll do it." The next months blurred into harder work. More hens, more goats, a small pen for sheep. They bought the land with the tin box savings and the rest of Eli's wages. They moved in before the roof was finished, sleeping under a patched tarp while the stars burned holes in the sky. For a while, the world felt new. But the land doesn't forget what it owes. It began with the dead hen. Found stiff in the coop one morning, her feet scattered across the dirt. The next day, 2 more. Eli found the tracks in the mud, too small for a coyote. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Then came the whispers. In town, men spoke quieter when they saw him, but Ainsley caught enough to know his name was in their mouths again. Old things resurfacing, things he'd never told her. One night, after they'd finished milking, she asked, "What happened, Eli?" He didn't look up from the pail. "Nothing that matters now." "It matters to me." A long silence, broken only by the goats shifting in their pen. "I was 16, he said finally. "My brother picked a fight with a man twice his size. I stepped in. The man didn't get up. And they called it murder. They needed someone to blame." She reached for his hand, but he was already standing, the pail swinging from his grip. The poison came in late summer. Not in the feed. Eli checked that every morning, but in the water trough. A sickly sweet smell curled from it when he bent to drink. The goats wouldn't touch it. By afternoon, he was on his knees in the yard, his breath ragged, skin gray. Ainsley half carried, half dragged him to the wagon, her heart slamming against her ribs. The road to town was a blur of ruts and stones, the rains burning her palms. The doctor worked fast, laudanum for the pain, water for the fever, a quiet word to Ainsley about how close it had been. She sat by Eli's bed all night, listening to the rain against the roof, counting each breath as if her watching alone could keep him alive. By morning, his eyes opened. "You should have let me be," he rasped. "And let you die would have been easier. Not for me." He closed his eyes again, a faint, tired smile at the corner of his mouth. "You're a stubborn woman, Ainsley Monroe. And you're stuck with me, Eli Hart." When he could walk again, the work resumed. Slower at first, but steady. The poison trough was burned, the well cleaned. They doubled the fences, kept the animals close at night. The town watched, some with curiosity, others with something darker. But the eggs sold, and the cheese sold, and slowly, coins filled the tin box again. One evening, standing in the doorway, Eli said, "You did this. All of it. You took a man with nothing and made him something. You were always something," she said. He shook his head, eyes on the fields. "Education's a fine thing, Ainsley. You turned me from zero to hero." The sun was sinking, staining the sky in gold and blood. Somewhere in the distance, a storm was building again, its low rumble threading through the quiet. And though the air was warm, she felt the faint, electric shiver of what was still to come. The first frost came early that year, whitening the pasture before the leaves had fully turned. Eli stood at the fence line, the breath from his nostrils curling in the air like smoke, his hands gripping the rough wood as if the cold alone could anchor him. Ainsley watched from the doorway, her shawl drawn tight, sensing the heaviness in his stillness before he spoke a word. "They're circling," he said finally, his eyes on the tree line. She followed his gaze, catching only the faintest movement, a shadow sliding between the trunks, gone before she could name it. "Wolves." "Men," he said. The word sat heavy between them. That night, they locked everything down, coop barn, goat pen, until the place was a maze of latches and chains. Ainsley sat by the fire, mending a torn feed sack, while Eli oiled a rifle on the table. Neither spoke much, the silence broken only by the soft hiss of logs burning. It began small, tools missing from the shed, a fence post hacked clean through in the night, the prints of boots pressed deep into the mud by the well. Eli walked the perimeter each morning, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every inch. Ainsley could see the shift in him. Less laughter now, his shoulders bent forward as if bracing for a blow. "Who would do this?" she asked one morning, handing him a mug of coffee. He didn't answer right away. "Plenty who'd like to see me gone." The animals felt it too. The hens grew skittish, scattering at the slightest noise. The goats refused to graze in the far pasture. Even the old sheepdog stayed close to the porch, eyes fixed on the distance. One evening, they found the barn door open, the hinges hanging loose. Inside, the feed bins were overturned, the grain soaked in some foul-smelling liquid. Eli swore under his breath, kicking the bin aside. "They want to starve us out." Ainsley knelt, running her fingers through the ruined feed. "Then they'll have to try harder." They bought more grain, stored it in barrels inside the house. But the sense of being watched didn't lift. Eli took to sleeping in his boots, the rifle leaning against the wall by the bed. Some nights, Ainsley woke to find him at the window, staring into the dark. When the first snow came, it brought more than cold. A storm rolled in from the north, burying the farm under a thick, muffling white. For 3 days, they saw no one, heard nothing but the wind's hollow howl. On the 4th morning, Eli stepped outside to find tracks in the snow. 2 sets, leading from the road to the barn and back again. "They're getting bolder," he muttered, following the trail with slow, deliberate steps. By late winter, the harassment turned to sabotage. A fence line cut, freeing half the goats into the hills. Eli and Ainsley spent hours in the freezing wind, coaxing the animals back with feed and soft voices. One nanny never returned. The missing goat was still on their minds when Ainsley saw the figure. It was dusk, the fields washed in blue light, and a man stood just beyond the fence, tall, broad-shouldered, his face lost in shadow. She froze, the pail of milk heavy in her hands. "Eli." By the time he came running, the man was gone, leaving only a broken section of wire and the echo of his presence in the fading light. They couldn't prove anything. The sheriff came once, took a slow look around, and said, "Hard winter makes folks do strange things. Could just be hungry hands." But his eyes lingered too long on Eli, and his words carried no promise of help. As spring approached, the farm seemed to breathe again. Green shoots pushed through the soil, the goats grew fat on fresh grass, and the hens laid more than ever. Yet the tension didn't lift. It only lay quieter, coiled beneath the warmth. Then came the fire. It was past midnight when Ainsley woke to the smell of smoke. She shook Eli awake, and they were out the door in seconds, boots pounding the earth. The small shed by the far fence was ablaze, the flames licking high into the night. Eli grabbed a bucket, Ainsley another, and they ran to the well, passing water back and forth until fire hissed and spat itself into blackened ruin. The next morning, Eli found a rag soaked in lamp oil near the ashes. "They'll burn us out next," he said, his voice flat. "Not if we stop them," Ainsley replied. "How?" She didn't answer. "Not yet." They doubled the watches, Eli by night, Ainsley by day. The work wore on them, the sleeplessness carving shadows under their eyes. Still the farm held. The goats kidded healthy twins. The hens kept laying, and the cheese sold well enough to pay for repairs. One evening, As the sun bled into the hills, Eli came in from the field with something in his hand. A scrap of cloth, torn and muddy, found it snagged on the fence. It was thick wool, the kind worn by men who worked outside through winter. Ainsley turned it over in her hands, tracing the frayed edge. "I know whose this is," Eli said quietly. She met his eyes. "Then we go to him." The next day, they rode into town. The man, Grady Holt, was sitting outside the saloon, a half-empty bottle at his feet. His face tightened when he saw Eli, but he didn't move. "You've been on my land," Eli said. Grady's mouth twisted into a smile that wasn't one. "Your land, Hart? Last I checked, it was just dirt under the sky. You cut my fences. You poisoned my trough. You lit that fire. Prove it." The air between them felt thick enough to cut. Ainsley stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're not afraid of you, Grady Holt, and we're not leaving." His eyes slid to her, and for a moment, something darker flickered there. "Maybe you should be." They walked away without another word, but Ainsley felt his gaze on her back the whole ride home. That night, she lay awake long after Eli's breathing had settled. She thought about the hens, the goats, the land they'd built from nothing. She thought about the way Grady had looked at her, and the way the storm clouds gathered over the hills that afternoon. When dawn came, it broke over a farm still standing. But in her chest, the coil of unease remained, wound tighter than ever, waiting for the moment it would strike. The morning broke in brittle shards of light, glancing off the frost that clung stubbornly to the fence rails. Eli was already outside, the steam of his breath swirling in the sharp air. Ainsley stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching him walk the perimeter like a sentry. His steps were slow, deliberate, eyes sweeping each corner of the land as though expecting it to betray him. When he came in, the wind followed, cold, carrying the scent of damp earth. "Fence is intact," he said, setting the rifle against the wall. For now, she echoed, but her voice held no relief. They worked through the morning in silence. The goats bleated impatiently for their feed. The hens scratched and fussed in the yard. Yet the ordinary rhythm felt brittle, like a song played too softly to hide the dissonance beneath. It was near noon when Ainsley saw the tracks. She had gone to the creek to rinse a bucket and noticed them pressed deep into the mud, boot prints wide and fresh, crossing from the tree line toward the pasture. The water in her bucket sloshed as her grip tightened. She brought Eli to the spot. He crouched low, tracing the print with a callous hand. "Two men," he said, "one heavier than the other. Came through last night. Why didn't the dog bark?" Eli didn't answer. They followed the tracks as far as the pasture fence, where the trail vanished into the churn of hooves. One of the young goats was limping, a thin gash along its leg. Ainsley knelt to clean it, her hands steady but her jaw set. "They're testing us," she said. "They've been testing us for months," Eli replied. The wind shifted that afternoon, carrying the smell of smoke, faint, distant, but enough to quicken Eli's pace toward the barn. The smoke thinned before he found its source, a smoldering bundle of dried grass tucked beneath the hayloft ladder. "They're getting sloppy," Eli muttered, stamping it out. But the tightness in his voice told Ainsley he knew it wasn't carelessness. It was escalation. That night, they kept the lamps low. Eli sat by the window, the rifle balanced across his knees. Ainsley moved through the house in small, quiet motions, every creak of the floorboards drawing his gaze. Outside, the fields lay silver under the moon, but the shadows at the edge of the woods seemed thicker than they should. It was near midnight when the sound came, soft at first, like wind teasing the branches, then sharper, the crunch of boots on frost. Eli's hand tightened on the rifle. Ainsley moved to his side, her breath shallow. Two figures emerged from the tree line. They didn't hurry, didn't hide. The moonlight caught on the gleam of metal in one man's hand. Eli didn't move until they reached the fence. "That's far enough," he called, his voice steady but carrying the weight of a warning. The taller man stepped forward, Grady Holt. His grin was as thin as the line of frost on the fence rail. "Evening, Hart. Thought we'd stop by, see how you're getting on." "You've seen enough," Eli said. Grady's gaze drifted to Ainsley. "Don't mean any harm. Just neighbors being neighborly." The second man chuckled, low and mean. "You cross that fence. You won't walk back," Eli said, raising the rifle just enough to make a point. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Grady stepped back, his smile never faltering. "See you around, Hart." They melted into the trees. Their laughter carried on the cold air. Ainsley shut the window once they were gone, her hands trembling now that the danger had passed. "They're going to come back," she said. Eli nodded. "And next time, they won't stop at the fence." In the days that followed, they prepared. Extra boards for the fences, barrels of water near the barn, a length of chain for the front gate. Ainsley began carrying a small revolver in the pocket of her apron, its weight unfamiliar but strangely comforting. Spring's thaw came late. The fields turned to mud, the creek swelled, and the air carried the damp, restless energy of a season that could not quite break free of winter's grip. The animals grew restless too, pacing their pens, sensing the unease in their keepers. It was a week after the moonlit standoff when the attack came. The first noise was the frantic braying of the goats, followed by the splintering crack of wood breaking. Eli was already at the door when Ainsley grabbed a revolver and followed. The barn doors were wide open, hay scattered across the yard. Two figures moved in the chaos. One tried to drag a goat toward the fence, the other smashing a lantern against the wall. Flames leapt up, hungry and quick. Eli fired into the air, the sound shattering the night. "Drop it." The man with the goat bolted, disappearing into the dark. Grady turned toward Eli, the firelight flickering across his face. "Should have left when you had the chance," he said, before swinging a length of chain toward him. Eli met the blow with the rifle stock, the crack of wood against metal ringing out. Ainsley's heart hammered as she raised the revolver. "Stop," she shouted. For a moment, the world narrowed to the fire's roar, the pounding of her blood, and Grady's eyes locking on hers. Then Eli drove him back with a shove, sending him stumbling toward the open door. Grady hesitated, breathing hard, then spat into the dirt. This isn't over. He vanished into the night, the firelight licking at his heels. They managed to save the barn, beating back the flames until only blackened timbers remained along the wall. The air stank of smoke and singed hair, but the animals were safe. By dawn, the land was quiet again, the only sound the soft bleating of the goats. Ainsley stood in the yard, the revolver still heavy in her pocket, and watched the sun rise over the charred wood. Eli came to stand beside her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes shadowed but steady. "We held," he said. She nodded, though her gaze stayed fixed on the tree line. The mist was rising there, curling and twisting like something alive. "They'll be back," she said. "Yes," Eli replied. "And so will we." The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of smoke from somewhere far off. Neither of them moved, but both felt the same thing, that the fight had only just begun, and that every step forward from here would be walked on a knife's edge.